Alright everybody, here we go with the final 3 ink colors. In this video we're going to be reviewing Ruby for ARCHAZIA'S Island, and this is a video I think you're going to want to watch through because for the next 3 inks, or the next 3 videos for sure, this is what's really shaping the meta. We know Ruby and Steel have traditionally been paired with other ink pairings to be the top of the metagame. What changes with Ruby in this set? How are Ruby decks going to adapt with some of these new cards? Let's go ahead and jump straight in. We are going to skip over the dual ink cards that we've covered up to the Emerald point. So if you want to see those, go back to those videos and you can check them out. Just skip through the video. We're going to start with Grandma Fa here. And this one right off the bat looks interesting to me. A 2-cost inkable 1/1 body that quests for 2. And whenever this character quests, you may give chosen character of yours +2 strength this turn. This card, like, I know they're trying to push Ruby Steel, and this card does seem to fit into that mold. I don't really see it fitting into too many other areas just yet, but, you know, it's weird for me to say this, but, like, in mid-range Ruby decks, which might become more of a thing, not really Ruby Amethyst, but maybe, like, a mid-range Ruby Sapphire, which you might be saying, well, if I'm playing Ruby Sapphire, why wouldn't I just play the Tier 0 version, which we'll get to later, but this card is actually quite decent. For a common especially, it's going to be really good in draft, but in certain constructed builds, it could be good, especially since we've seen some, well, I shouldn't say that because we haven't got to the steel part yet, but there will be cards that challenge ready characters. We're going to see more of that, and I think we need more of that in this game, so I'm really happy. Again, if you watch my videos, you know we call this out. Really happy that they're doing that, and this kind of card can really help those cards or cards with rush get a really good benefit, right? You play this, and then the next turn you play a character that has rush, you quest with this, give that character that has rush +2 strength, now you're instantly taking out a threat on the opponent's side, right? Or something like that. So this is actually a pretty decent card for a common in my opinion. Yeah, decent overall. Next up, we got Queen of Hearts. This is one of the shift targets for the new Queen of Hearts. While this character has damage, she gets +3 strength, making her a 4/4 body for 2 that quests for 1. This is, again, another good card. Again, depending on the deck that you're playing, but a 1/4 body for 2 isn't necessarily that bad with the Queen of Hearts name, considering she has 2 decent shifts, one of them being the Emerald Ruby one, the new one, that's actually pretty good, you know, the strength stat aside. But then if she has damage, right, if you're able to trade out a 1/1, if you're able to sing like Teeth and Ambitions or something and put 2 damage on this or whatever, decent card overall, to be honest. Obviously overstated for its cost. Next up, you got the Matchmaker. Whenever this character challenges another character, each opponent loses 1 lore, a 4-cost inkable 4/3 that quests for 1. You know, decent in draft, probably not anything that's going to see play in constructed, most likely. Next up, you got Deny. I think I'm saying that right. I don't remember what this is from, but a 3-cost inkable 3/2 body with Reckless and Resist 2. No questing power. This is actually an okay card simply for the fact that it has the Resist 2, and obviously you're going to use this as a challenger. You can't put Rush on this, it would be too strong, but that would have made it like really good in my opinion, because Resist 2 with Rush, yeah, it would have been too good for 3, right? The two willpower doesn't matter so much with the Resist 2, so that's really strong. It survives a lot of the steel interactions. Generally, the way that, at least for right now, the way the game is designed, the lower the willpower, if it has resist on it, it's usually going to be okay. But the lower the strength is a problem because of the Ruby strength-based removal. So the low willpower here normally would have been making this card like totally terrible, but the resist 2 making it able to survive things like strengths and storms and things like that is actually makes this card like half decent. But a 3-cost 3/2, I mean, it does have resist 2. It's always going to have to challenge. In the late game, this doesn't do anything, and that's the problem with playing a card like this. You top deck this later on, and you're like, oh yeah, like I'm not doing anything with this card really, and for that reason, like it's kind of mid. But on curve, it could be kind of decent. Next up, you got a Stabbington Brother. Again, I have no idea what this is from. Without a patch, 3/4 body for 4 uninkable with Rush. Your other character's name, Stabbington Brother, gain Rush. So again, one of these paired cards, you saw this in the first chapter with Flotsam and Jetsam. Probably not going to see any competitive play. We got the new Belle. We knew that this card, this was one of the first cards that was out, right? It's also gotten enchanted here. And because we saw how good, I think in my reveal video, or my review of the reveal video, I mentioned like, yeah, like this is a cute card and everything, but like, you know, you're going to need like a really good Belle in order to want to play this. And my goodness, did they ever release a good Belle for us to play this with. But, you know, 9 cost, shift 7, you lower the shift, right? Not the cost, the shift to play her for each item you have in your discard. So if you have 5 items in your discard, she now shifts for 2 on top of a Belle. which actually makes her really strong, right? Because I mean, you have to play this in Ruby Sapphire. You can't play this in Sapphire Steel, which would have been the better ink pairing for her because you'd play Photospheres and Popsicles. But you probably end up playing her for like Shift 5, Shift 4 if you do play her. But you need the other Belle on board, right? So for that reason, she's still kind of mid for me. Whenever she quests, you recycle some of your items, which is good. But if you're going to recycle items, I'd want to play the Tamatoa, not really the Belle. But that being said, you know, you shift her, you quest with her. She's a 7/7 body. If you get her out on turn like 5, like you're winning the game probably, because nothing's really dealing with a 7/7. That quest for 3 and will also gain you another 3 lore for the 3 items you put on the bottom of your deck. So you're gonna quest, gain 6, and then you have a 7/7 body that's basically unanswerable for like the next couple of turns, most likely. Well, I shouldn't say it's unanswerable, right? Because Fox Craps will still be a thing and that kind of thing, but it's a pretty powerful card, and you're going to gain a lot of advantage off of putting this on board. Your opponent will have to overextend if you do end up getting this out early. So this card is actually not as bad as I thought it was, simply because we saw how good the Belle we got is. Yeah, it's quite amazing. So yeah, decent card overall. I think if you're going to play the Belle, you'll have to play her in a very tailored version of Ruby Sapphire. You don't play her in like, you know, the top tier versions of it, because yes, this ink pairing will have multiple versions that are top tier this next set, but we'll see. Next up, we got Cybug, 2-cost inkable 1/2 body that says this character gains +1 strength for each other character you have in play. It is a common, quest for 1. You know, it's a decent card. It comes down for 2. It might be like a 3/2 or a 4/2, but you know, how much mileage are you getting out of this? Even with the overstated strength boost, since it trades out with something, you're likely losing this card as well. So like, why not just play something that's guaranteed to get the strength or has a good stat line or a better effect? So it's okay, but I think there are just better cards on curve. You got the other Stabbington brother here with a patch, 4/4 for 5, quest for 1. When you play this character, each chosen opponent loses 1 lore. So, you know, you can make like a budget deck with these guys in them. Maybe I could see something like that working. This card coming down with Rush. If the other one's already in play, your opponent loses a lore. You trade something out, getting some advantage that way. Again, not super top tier or optimized or anything, but a cool concept for sure. I'm glad that they print cards like that still. Next up, you got another interesting 1-drop for Ruby. This is a card that I think Ruby Amber will definitely make the best use out of from just my immediate thoughts. But the 1-drop card Soldiers, Royal Troops, a 1/2 body. While a damaged character is in play, this character gets +2 strength and it quests for 1. So while this is good, is because you play this on 1, you play like Mother Gothel on 2. That's a character that comes into play with 3 damage. Then this card becomes a 3/2. Your Mother Gothel is a 3/4. Your Mother Gothel has damage on it, so it can proc with Rapunzel in the next 2 turns, which is pretty strong. So decent card overall. I don't really see too much application outside of Ruby Amber, unless we see Ruby Steel really start to take off and some of the damage-based cards there mattering, but decent card overall. Next up, we got a new Cogsworth in Ruby, a 3-cost inkable 3/3 body that says, while you have an item card in your discard, this character gets +2 strength and it quests for 1. This is a good card. This is a good card. Again, if you're making a Ruby Sapphire more mid-range aggro deck, this card I think is something you could play, because you could play the item on 1, banish it, play the Belle, then you have an item banished right away. You play this Cogsworth out, now you have a 5/3 body on 3. Yes, they all just quest for 1, so they're not too significant, but you're threatening taking out anything the opponent puts on board, basically. So you're controlling the game state, and you have overstated characters on the cost curve in that Ruby Sapphire mid-range build. It's not a broken card, and it's not a card that will displace any top-tier options in the top-tier decks, but it's still a good card in my opinion. Anytime you get extra value like this out of a card, that's not a very hard condition to fulfill in like a Ruby Sapphire deck, for example. I think that a card like this, it's good. It's good. For a common, it's pretty good. Next up, we've got Toby, a 1-cost uninkable 3/1 body that quests for 1. So, okay. Hard to say if this card will have any meaning. Probably not. But, you know, it's another 1-drop. We can always use those. Next up, we got Beagle Boy, Small Time Crooks. This is a 4-cost inkable 3/3 body that quests for 2, and whenever this character quests, chosen characters of yours gains Rust and Resist +1 this turn. Now, this card I think is actually low-key kind of interesting, because this is this is where like the drawback of having to have it sit on board for a turn and then wait and then quest with it to gain the ability could actually help. Because, you know, the card that you're going to play on the following turn, so you play this, let's say, on 4, and then you play a card on 5. You quest with this, you give that card you just played a rush and resist +1. Now that card can take out an opponent's threat and likely survive, right? There's a lot of cool combos you can do, right? Like triggering effects that trigger when exerted. I mean, there's not really anything that you get off of that in Ruby or Sapphire, to my knowledge, that I can think of off the top of my head. But it's a decent card. Not something that probably sees too much competitive play, but what's interesting is on the 4 cost curve in Ruby and Sapphire, there's not really too much that's great. I mean, it's been Grammatala and Hiram historically, so this is another consideration for like the mid-range version again of Ruby Sapphire that you'd want to play, not the control-oriented version that has been top tier for a while now, and will likely be tier 0 in this next format. But yeah, good deck, good card overall for that kind of deck, I think. All right, next up, we've got the first Ruby Steel. Oh, no, sorry, this is the second one, right? Because we got one earlier, right? Yeah, we did. We got Deny. But that one, you know, neither here nor there, in my opinion. But a 3-cost uninkable 2/3 Li Shang, newly promoted. I won't let you down. This character can challenge readied characters, and while this character has damage, he gets +2 strength. So this is a cool concept. If they really wanted to make Ruby Steel much more appealing, I think they needed to just overstat these characters just a little bit. And by overstat, I don't mean give them more strength and more willpower. I think they just needed to give them more abilities. Like, you needed to really leverage Rush on these Ruby Steel cards, because this card coming down, being able to challenge a readied character, makes this like worlds better. The fact that this has to come down, wait, and then have damage on it before he gets like the meaningful strength to take out something on the cost curve of 3 or higher, most likely, makes this card very underwhelming in my opinion. Challenging readied characters is great. We need more of that, I think. But the other conditions to fulfill for this, like having to wait a whole turn before you can actually challenge, and then having to need damage to get the strength boost, just makes this not as good as it could have been. Like, honestly, giving it Rush and Challenger 2 would have been just way better, honestly. You know, the Challenger 2 makes it so that after he's exerted, he's more easily dealt with, because only the 2 strength will apply instead of the 4 that he's challenging into with. But yeah, I just think that this card is just a little too underwhelming for this kind of ink pairing to make it more viable, unfortunately. And it's uninkable, right? So I think you could have gone a little bit more with the abilities to make this card more relevant. Next up, you got a new Moana, Island Explorer. This card's kind of interesting. A 4-cost inkable 4/3 with evasive. And then whenever this character challenges another character, another chosen characters of yours gets +3 strength this turn. Quest for 1. So an interesting card, but I think there are better strength modulating cards than this that you'd want to play. This does have the Moana name, but at 4 costs, it's already kind of expensive. And do you really want to shift on top of a 4-cost card? Probably not. That's very expensive. That's a very expensive card to lose tempo on. So mediocre, probably doesn't see any play. The Phantom Blot Shadowy figure. This is what, Stitch, Rocket, whatever, from the previous sets. 2-cost uninkable 3/1 with Rush. Quest for 1. So, you know, a 2-cost removal spell, basically. Throw it down, remove something with the Rush. Stitch didn't see any play. No reason this would. Probably in the set just for draft. Next up, you got Beast. This is a rare 6-cost uninkable 5/5 body Frustrated Designer. You exert it and you pay 2 ink to banish 2 of your items, deal 5 damage to chosen character. So this is really playing into that whole item-oriented Ruby Sapphire deck that uses some of the new Maurice cards as well. So the whole Beauty and the Beast archetype. It does quest for 2. So again, you run into this problem I've talked about in other videos where, you know, it quests for 2, but I have to exert it to use the ability. It's like, you know, and it's overstated, not overstated, but has a 5/5 stat line. So this card is just kind of all over the place. And for the 6 uninkability, like, I just don't want to go near this card, honestly. You can argue that, oh, but, you know, it has a lot of versatility. I can either challenge with it with the 5/5, I can either quest with it, or I can deal damage to a character directly by banishing 2 of my items. Yeah, but the ability isn't very good. As a standalone 2 questing 5/5 body for 6 uninkable, that's just not good, right? So when you look at it that way, it's like, I'd rather do other things with my items, like actually use them, draw with them off Hiram, you know, play Belle out, etc., than use the ability to deal 5 damage, because Ruby has more efficient ways of removal anyways, probably, that you'd want to play. And this card I just don't see the point, really. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe you can let me know, but for now, yeah, it's a pass. All right, next up, you've got Mushu, Majestic Dragon, a 5-cost inkable rare Ruby Steel card in a 4/4 stat line. This card, when I read it, I was like, yeah, this is great. I like to see cards like this develop for ink pairings that have traditionally not done very well. Whenever one of your characters challenges, they gain resist +2 during that challenge. That's great. So you can drop this on 5, and then your previous characters on board can start challenging, and they all gain resist 2. That is really strong, because your opponent might be like, okay, like if he trades out my board, at least he loses his board as well. But then you drop this, and then that changes the whole math of the situation, right? Now you're challenging your opponent's board, and what they planned for you to like lose your board and challenging theirs. Now you're able to be like, yep, now all my characters survive, and I just wiped out your board through challenging, right? So pretty good. And then during your turn, whenever one of your character banishes another character in a challenge, you gain 2 lore. So just out of the blue, this card can come down. You're challenging your opponent's stuff, you're banishing them, you're gaining lore in the process, your characters are surviving. This card can just be like, I don't want to say a blowout card, but it potentially could be. But it's definitely a tempo swing card for Ruby Steel, which is amazing. So yeah, this is a good card. It's definitely a card I think you play 4 of in Ruby Steel, just because you want to see it. You know, it's inkable at worst. It's a 4/4 stat line, so it survives against things like, or you know, can't even be brawled or Sisu'd away. Still gets Zeus'd, but you know what doesn't these days. Yeah, it's a good card overall for this ink pairing. It's definitely, I would say, probably the best Ruby Steel card I've seen. When you're building that deck, this card, I think, does a lot for you. And, you know, you'd probably obviously want to orient this kind of ink pairing as like a challenger-focused deck, which has its problems because, you know, your opponent, it depends on your opponent having stuff exerted, which can be a problem into, like, let's say, like, Amethyst matchups. And when you look at like other top tier decks like Ruby Sapphire, they don't really play a lot of characters. Like they play a couple of really big, powerful characters, and you're like, okay, how much am I really going to challenge into that? So, you know, for the metagame, this card still has some ways to go. Against aggro decks, obviously this card is like a blowout, but into the top control decks, you could struggle with Ruby Steel in general, not just this card. This is still a good card, but like, you know, you understand what I'm saying with like the limitations of, you know, this card's good, but against certain decks, like the actual concept of what you want to do with a Ruby Steel deck probably doesn't pan out as well as, which is why it's not like a top tier deck in and of itself, right? As well as other decks though. Next up, we got Maurice, a 4-cost inkable 5/2 body that says Unconventional Adventure. When you play this character, you may banish chosen item of yours to draw a card. So, like a worse Hiram with way less willpower, but way more strength. If the banished item is named Maurice's Machine, you may also banish a chosen character with 2 strength or less. So this is interesting. From what I remember, the Maurice's Machine is not a very good card, so I'd probably end up passing on this because I don't want to play Maurice's Machine. And you don't want to play like very specific 2-card combos. Banish an item, draw a card. You know, it feeds that whole Beauty and the Beast archetype, getting items banished into your banished pile so that you can trigger the Belle easier, etc. So again, as like a combo-oriented deck, yeah, you could play it. It's kind of cute, but it's not going to be top tier by any means. I don't think you play this in the Ruby Sapphire decks that are top tier. The Hiram is just way better. You'd rather just see Hiram. You don't want to banish for 1. I'd rather just play Grammatala and just scry 2. And not lose my item. So like the comparisons there, hopefully you can see them. You're not really playing this outside of Ruby Sapphire, at least right now. So for that reason, not very good in my opinion. Next up, you got a 7-cost inkable Goofy, super rare, 7/6 stat line with evasive. Whenever this character challenges another character, your other characters get +1 lore this turn. Interesting card. I mean, it is very expensive, and it does have evasive, but no rush. So again, it has to sit on the board. Your opponent's going to likely have to try to play around this, although I should say like it's not something that you can really play around all that much. I mean, a 7/6 body is not easily dealt with. So, you know, if your opponent ends up questing and they're like, okay, now this Goofy's going to challenge, take out my character, and then their other characters get +1 lore. But the issue is, again, am I going to have a wide board on turn 7? Like if I have a wide board that I want to get the most benefit off of this +1 lore, am I not playing more of an aggro-oriented strategy? And how am I getting to 7? Am I playing Ruby Sapphire? I'm not playing this in Ruby Sapphire. My other character's getting +1 lore in Ruby Sapphire. It doesn't really matter, right? There are other objectives you're doing with that deck to just blow out the game and win more efficiently. So like this card doesn't seem to fit in anywhere right now. But, you know, just another unique card to have in the card pool for sure. Next up, we've got an 8-cost inkable Lyle Tiberius Rourke with a 6/4 stat line, Crystallized Mercenary, quest for 3, once during your turn, whenever a card is put into your inkwell, deal 2 damage to each character in play. So this card is really powerful. The issue is it costs 8. And what are you really playing this in? Like, you could argue if you're playing Ruby Amber and you're playing ways to get this card out early, maybe something like the Gaston, or going back to things like Lanterns, potentially. Ruby Sapphire, you don't need to play a card like this. There are just more efficient cards to play. This is a big quester though, but you have Sisu in that deck as well to play. So it's an interesting card. I just think it's a little too hard to get into play, maybe efficiently. It is inkable, so, you know, at worst, it goes into the inkwell. But by the time you play this card, how much value are you getting off of dealing 2 damage to each character in play? Like, do you tech this in for... I mean, if there were side decks in this game and you played this in your side deck for when you go up against those Amber Steel aggros and Emerald Amethyst aggros and stuff like that, yeah, maybe this is a lot better. But, you know, keep in mind that it's dealing 2 damage to itself, right? So it can only take 2 points of damage unless you heal it up or protect it with resist somehow. And then all of your other characters as well, right? So keep that in mind. So again, this card, not the hardest card to deal with. And then how many times you even proc this ability. So yeah, it just seems there are just better options than it right now, which is unfortunate because that means it probably never sees play at all. Anyways, next up you got the new Steel Mulan, Imperial General, the other super rare here, Floodborn Hero Princess, 5/6 stat line, shifts for 5, and it has evasive, which is great. Whenever this character challenges another character, your other characters gain. This character can challenge readied characters this turn. So I would have liked to see this quest for 1, cost 6, and shift for 4. And then have this ability. The ability to challenge readied characters is definitely really nice. A 5/6 stat line, like, you're probably going to need to strength boost this to deal with like Ruby Sapphire's big threats that they're going to drop. There are ways to do that. This is a decent card. I think even with its current stat line, I think you still would opt to play this. We'd have to build out the deck more to see it, which, again, if you're subscribed to the channel, you know we're going to be posting a lot of deck profiles moving forward. But yeah, this is a card I think that we will see in Ruby Steel. I mean, Ruby Steel has a mid-range deck. I think it has some legs. I think it can do some work. Like, you play this, you like, I don't know. I don't want to say there's no reason to play that Li Shan, whatever. I forget how to say the other person's name. Oh my goodness. This one, Li Shang. They're just better cards to play. Like, one of the most powerful things with the steel cards, right? Like Tinkerbells and stuff like that, which I gotta buy some more Tinkerbells, by the way. Set 1 Tinkerbells. Giving that card the ability to challenge ready characters is broken, right? Like, challenge a ready character with my Tinkerbell and then deal 2 damage to something else. It's pretty good. Or the Simba, right? But that costs 7. And the Tinkerbell can shift. So yeah, some pretty cool interactions. All right, next up we got Baloo, Old Iron Paws. Your characters with 7 or more strength can't be dealt damage, and a quest for 2. So this card is kind of wild because, you know, it's a 6 cost uninkable, which isn't great, at a 5/4 stat line, which is like, okay, quest for 2, which is fine, and then it has protection for characters with 7 or more strength. They can't be dealt damage. So that means they can't be like hit with steel songs. They can't be challenged and be dealt damage. So what immediately comes to mind is like, holy crap, you just protect your Maui Shark. But then again, you know, Maui Shark and stuff still gets outed by like Be Prepared and stuff like that. But that's assuming you're going up against Ruby. We saw how oppressive Maui Shark was last setting into the aggro decks, right? Does Maui Shark make its way into the next variation of the top tier Ruby Sapphire deck? I think there is a variation that plays it still, yes. But this card essentially being I don't want to call it a floodgate, but like it gives immunity to your Maui Shark is the way I look at it, right? Your Maui Shark can now challenge into a bunch of things and not have to worry about taking damage. Maui and Scar, which would be the other two cards I would have really considered with this, or characters with Rush. I think Hercules is another one that comes to mind, but that's another uninkable, right? When you look at this, let's go ahead and look at this a little bit more. I'm looking at Ruby, and I'm gonna want to see characters with strength 7, 8, 9, that have Rush. I guess we can say, like, you're not gonna play this in Ruby Amethyst. There's just way more efficient ways to play Ruby Amethyst. Strength of this, and we need, what was I saying again? Oh my goodness. Rush is what we want. Abilities, right? So not classification. Keywords? Yeah, keywords, Rush. Hercules and Gaston are the only cards that can come down instantly and get amazing value off of this. If we take off the Rush, these are the cards that get protection. So your Belle could have protection, which is decent. Your Maleficent Dragons could have protections, which is rather interesting, right? This is a card that already sees play and will continue to see play. Old School Teika, that's probably not going to see play. Lumiere. I mean, Gaston is also uninkable, which is unfortunate. This Teika is not going to be seeing play. It's really just Maui Shark, right? I mean, this Goofy, like we just discussed, probably doesn't make its way into anything. The Maleficent Dragon and the Maui Sharks is something you could use the Big Arrow with within Ruby. If we go through other ink pairings, like, are you going to play... There's nothing in Emerald with more than 7 strength. Are you serious? Wow, okay. There's only Maleficent in Amethyst anyways. You've got Chernobog and Amber. Yeah, you've got like nothing in blue and Sapphire. And you virtually have nothing. So yeah, you're really only banking this off of the Ruby card. So right now, Bagheera is basically for Maui Shark is the way I look at it. And Maleficent Dragon, which in and of itself is good. But is it worth playing a 6-cost uninkable for that? I don't think so, right? So it's one of those legendaries. Like I saw pre-orders going for like 10 Canadian. It's probably not even worth that in my opinion. I might be completely wrong, and it might go to like, you know, more than that. But I remember I bought Yzmas, the Emerald Ys, or not Emerald, the Amethyst Yzmas at like $11 Canadian each, and then they ended up dropping to 5. Right? I mean, not a huge loss for me, but like it's a card that seemed decent, and I think it is a decent card. But you know, if I just would have waited, I could have saved myself $15. I only bought 3, but yeah, I was like, yeah, this Yzma, you know, 4 coming down on 3. And to be honest, like there's some hidden tech with that Yzma, but that's not for this video. Let's move on. So a mediocre card, I think you could pick them up if you're getting them relatively cheap, and you don't mind losing a couple of dollars if they go down from the current price of like at the pre-release. I do think long term this is probably like a $5-6 card maybe. It's just not going to be one of the legendaries that are relevant. Next up, you got Ratigan here, Nefarious Criminal. This is an interesting one. I'm glad that Ratigan got a legendary though. This would be, in my opinion, the perfect card to have the damage and draw and made it like a Ruby Amber. But then I guess you wouldn't want to make it legendary to tie the legendary specifically to an ink pairing. But whatever. You got a 4-cost inkable 3/3 body. Whenever you play an action while this character is exerted, gain 1 lore. So it's like Maui Shark, but cheaper. Whenever you play an action while this character is exerted, and this character has to be exerted, the Maui Shark, whenever you play an action, gain 1 lore. But you're just doubling down on Maui, basically. You're doubling down on an action deck, right? But it's just the worst Maui Shark. I mean, Maui Shark is 6. This is 4. And this does have a very nice enchanted, in my opinion. That's pretty cool. Storyborn Villain, quest for 1. I mean, it has to be exerted, though. So it's like significantly worse than Maui, actually. I'm just trying to think, like, this Ruby Amber, I was trying to make Ruby Amber songs work with the Maui Shark, and I still think that the Maui Shark would just be better. I mean, this card is also pretty easy to deal with. So yeah, the two legendaries, in my opinion, in Ruby are just things that might be passed up on. To be fair, like there is a deck I think you could potentially try to make with this and the Maui Shark and just go overload on the actions, right? But then you're pigeonholing yourself into like a specific line of combo, and if you don't see that, you likely just lose. And in general, what you've seen have success in this game at the highest levels in the most competitive senses are the cards that are standalone very good, right? So keep that in mind. Next up, you've got a 2-cost inkable 2/2 Sir K uncommon quest for 2, so nothing unique there. You got a new Milo Thatch, 2-cost inkable Undaunted Scholar, 2 strength, 2 willpower. Whenever you play an action, you may give chosen character +2 strength this turn, a quest for 1, and it is a rare. Yeah, potentially interesting. Probably meant to be played in the Ruby Emerald deck, which is going to be action focused, obviously. So, you know, getting a strength boost of +2 is nice, but are there cards that can do that more efficiently? Probably. Next up, you got Edgar Balthazar, 5-cost inkable 6/5, quest for 1, so just generic, not anything to see there. Now we're moving on to the actions. We've got Company, a 3-cost uninkable rare. Ready all your characters, they gain Reckless this turn. So you quest with everything, you play this, you ready them all, they don't take any damage like on your feet, etc. And then they gain Reckless, which means they have to challenge. Not necessarily bad, but a 3-cost uninkable, that's, again, kind of conditional. Probably not going to see any play competitively. A 7-cost inkable Dragonfire. So instead of costing 5 and being uninkable, this is just banish chosen character for 7. Is there a world where you would play this over Be Prepared's? It's definitely an interesting concept because most players will try to play around Be Prepared's. So having the ink ability of this and not having it ripped by Ursula Deceiver is interesting. But we'll have to see how the metagame develops. There's also the card from the last set, the Jafar staff one, I forget what it's called, but it's uninkable 7, banish chosen character, and draw a card. So is the draw card more beneficial for it being uninkable versus the ink ability to not draw a card? It's interesting. Now the coil for Ruby, in my opinion, is decent. During your turn, whenever a card is put into your inkwell, you just let a character have +2 strength. This is the card I'd probably want to play over all of the characters, to be honest, because this is more reliable to gain strength with. Again, you have to keep inking every turn, which may not be what you want to do. But it is an inkable card in and of itself. If you have multiple of these in play, if you play 4 and maybe you only end up wanting to play 2 on board, you ink the other 2 if you end up seeing them. You're able to give up to 4 strength to a character or split it out between characters. And it's just a little bit more reliable in that sense. You have this on board, your opponent has to constantly evaluate if it's worth exerting their stuff, right? Or if you're playing this in Ruby Steel, like you're challenging my readied characters, you have this strength boost, so you're going to be able to run over everything, especially if you have resist. So this is a good card. I like this one. I liked the Amethyst or not Amethyst, the Ruby Chromacon as well, which is exert, give +1 strength. This is just better now than it, obviously. I mean, that costs 1, this costs 2, but still, this has the condition that you have to keep inking to get the ability. But yeah, it's interesting. It's not +2 strength until the start of your next turn, so then you lose it at the end of your turn, so your opponent could challenge into your stuff more easily. But it's still a good item. I don't think it sees play although it could in the Ruby Sapphire version. Actually, yeah, it could definitely see play because it turns Maui into an 8/6. Which is actually pretty good. And you're inking multiple times in Ruby Sapphire. Like, Sapphire is so broken right now. You're inking multiple times in Sapphire, so you can, during your turn, whenever a card is put. So it's not even once per turn. It's not like once during your turn. It just says during your turn. So if I ink like 2 or 3 times in a turn, like I'm giving +2/+2, right? Just from one of these. If I have 2 of these in play, I'm giving +8. That's crazy. Yeah, it's interesting. Then we move on to the items and we're done with this ink pairing. But yeah, a lot of interesting tech cards in Ruby, I think. Definitely an ink pairing to be aware of moving into the set and the cards in it. Unconventional tool, when this item is banished, you may pay 2 less for the next item you play this turn. A 1 cost inkable item, I think this is decent. Obviously in Ruby Sapphire, banish it off for the Belle, and then you can play another item in your hand for free. Banish it off of Hiram, draw 2, and then maybe you draw into an item that you can pay 2 less for. It makes your lucky dimes cost 5 instead of 7, which you're probably playing the lucky dime off the Tamato anyways. It makes your popsicles free. It makes your coils free, which obviously the Sapphire coil is the best one, and we'll get to that next, obviously. It makes your Ruby coil free if you want to play that kind of thing. So you can look at all of the 2 cost and lower items. And again, I'm going to limit this to Ruby Sapphire at the moment, because you're not really playing this card in anything other than Ruby Sapphire. But we're going to go types, we're going to go items, and we're going to go cost. Let's see what we can just play for free off of this card getting banished. The Devil Eyes Diamond, which we haven't got to yet, it's going to be the next card, but I think this card is actually half decent as well. Longboat, you're probably not playing that. Gold Coin saw some tech play, but you're probably not playing that either. The Potion of Might, you could say you could play. Medallion Weights, I think is power corrupt at this point. Vitalosphere likely still sees some play. Shield of Virtue maybe. And then obviously, you know, the Sapphire cards. This is the big one, the Sapphire Coil. Playing this out for free is nice. You don't play ice blocks anymore if you have Sapphire Coil, pretty much. I mean, there's a case to say that you could still play ice blocks, but you know, this is uninkable. This gives -1. This is inkable. It gives -2. Has the condition that you're going to ink every turn, which you don't always do in Ruby Sapphire. You ink aggressively in the beginning, and then you kind of strategically ink from there. Pops, yeah, I mean, it's just popsicles, Sapphire Coil, maybe Shield of Virtue, maybe Vitalosphere, maybe Potion of Might, maybe Devil's Eye Diamond, maybe Ruby Coil, or maybe another copy of itself. So I guess there's enough there to say that it is worth it. Yeah, it's a good item to have for that ink pairing, is what I'll say. And then you got Maurice's Machine. So this card costs 3, and in and of itself, it doesn't do anything. When this character is, when this item is banished, that has to be banished for it to do something. You may return an item card with cost 2 or less from your discard to your hand. So it's like, am I going to play this useless item for 3 just so I can get Maurice on 4 or Hiram and then get back an item from my discard? No, I'm playing something more impactful on 3 anyways. This thing should have cost like 1, in my opinion. But yeah, it is what it is. Not a card that I think will see any play at all. And then Devil's Eye Diamond. You exert this, if one of your characters was damaged this turn, gain 1 lore. So this, at a 2-cost inkable item, and it has an enchanted, is very interesting. So obviously in like the Ruby Steel deck, you could play this. Ruby Sapphire, I think, could even play this. I think this is a good card. The way I look at it is like not a free spellbook. It's inkable. Spellbook wasn't. Spellbook cost 1 every turn. It was very slow. Do you play this in Ruby Sapphire though? How much do you value gaining 1 lore every turn? It's probably too slow in Ruby Sapphire actually. But in Ruby Steel, getting this out early, and you're constantly throwing your characters into stuff, constantly playing damage spells, etc., I think it's way more applicable there. Would this see play in Ruby Amethyst? Ruby Amethyst is a challenge focused deck too, right? Madam M Foxes, Crabs, etc. I think you could make a case to play this in Ruby Amethyst, right? That's a very slow burn deck, right? So you are dragging out the game for a couple of turns. So you are, every turn gaining that extra lore, right? If you're challenging or if your characters get damaged. Yeah, it's interesting. So I think it's a decent card. I think it will see some play, but it's hard to say how competitive it will be. And that's going to wrap it up for Ruby, guys. If you made it this far in the video, thank you again for watching. The next one is the big one in Sapphire, so stay tuned for that and make sure you subscribe if you want to see it. Thank you for watching. Quantum is out.